Okay, the name of this sermon is called 7 Times. 7 times. You may find that a little strange. Well, you'll understand as we get into this word. 7 times. I want you to turn in your Bibles to Deuteronomy, chapter 4, verse 32. Ask now about the former days, long before time, from the day God created the human beings on the earth. Ask from one end of the heavens to the other. Has anything so great as this ever happened? Or has anything like it ever been heard of? Has any other people heard the voice of God speaking out of the fire as you have and live? Has any God ever tried to take for himself one nation out of another by testing, by signs and wonders, by war, by a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, or by great and awesome deeds, like all the things the Lord your God did for you in Egypt before your very eyes? You were shown these things so that you might know that the Lord is God. Besides him there is no other. From heaven he made you hear his voice to discipline you. On earth he showed you in great fire, and you heard his voice from out of the fire. Because he loved your ancestors and chose their descendants after them, he brought you out of Egypt by his presence and his great strength, to drive out before you nations greater and stronger than you, and to bring you into the land, to give it to you for your inheritance as it is today. Acknowledge and take to heart this day that God is God in heaven above and on earth below. There is no other. Keep his decrees and commands, which I am giving you today, so that it may go well with you and your children after you, that you may live long in the land the Lord your God gives you for all time. So God is talking to the Israelites, obviously, here, and he's telling them, has anything like this ever happened before? I brought you out of this nation, and I brought you out of a nation stronger than you are. You might say they birthed Israel. They came out through labor, and they were brought into the promised land, and God displaced nations stronger and larger than Israel. There were 7 nations there. And he gave the land, this inheritance, to the Israelites. Friends, when you get saved, you are brought out of darkness into light. You're brought out of this world into salvation, and you have been given, listen, they are bigger and stronger. The world is bigger and stronger and nastier than you'll ever think of being, and you are birthed out of this world. You are born again into God's inheritance for you. Okay? And God spoke to the Israelites from it. Did you catch that? I thought it was kind of interesting, so I'm going to back up here. I want to say it again. From heaven he made you hear his voice to discipline you. So God disciplined the Israelites. He showed them. You know, we tend to forget that God disciplines, and we're going to read the scripture on it in a moment. He disciplines the children he loves. He talks to them. God loved Cain. God did not want Cain to wander from him. He loved him, and he spoke to him, and he disciplined him with his words. But sometimes being disciplined with just words isn't enough, is it? You ever tell your children to do something right, and then they don't do it? And you discover that sometimes the best way to get through to their brain is not through their ears, but it's from a further part of the body, okay? From a distant part of their body, south of the body, of the head, maybe you might want to put it that way. I don't know why that is. I used to swear at some of my children. They didn't hear through their ears, but they heard through their behind. I don't understand how that works, but it does seem to work. Spare the rod, spoil the child, friends. Hebrews chapter 12 and verse 4, okay? It says, in your struggle against sin, you have not yet resisted the point of shedding your blood, and you have not completely forgotten this word of encouragement that addresses you as a father addresses his son. It says, my son, do not make light of the Lord's discipline, and do not lose heart when he rebukes you, because the Lord disciplines the one he loves, and he chastens everyone he accepts as a son. Endure hardship as discipline. God is treating you as children. For what child are or children are not disciplined by their father. If you are not disciplined, and everyone undergoes discipline, then you are illegitimate, or you're not legitimate, nor true sons and daughters at all. Moreover, we all have had human fathers who disciplines us, and we respect them for it. How much more should we submit to the Father's spirits and live? They discipline us for a little while as they thought best, but God disciplines us for our good, in order that we may share in His holiness. No discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. Later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it. Therefore, strengthen your feeble arms and weak knees. Make level paths for your feet, and so that the lame may not be disabled, but rather healed. Now, listen closely to these words. We're going to go back to where we started in Deuteronomy, but I want to go over to Hebrews, because I want you to understand that God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. He disciplined them in the Old Testament. He disciplines us in the New Testament. If God doesn't discipline you, and as it says, everyone undergoes discipline, then you're not true sons or daughters of God. You're not true children of God. But God disciplines the son they love. Why do we discipline? You know, we discipline, and I'll tell you something. It takes effort to discipline your children. I see a lot of lazy parents these days, and you know this world will tell you evil is good and good is evil, and they act like discipline is just a hard thing to do with your children. Oh, you shouldn't raise your voice with your children. You shouldn't spank your children. You shouldn't do this and you shouldn't do that. Well, friends, if you aren't, you're raising delinquents. Discipline not only brings peace to the child, but it brings peace to the home and peace to society. So many children or people who get saved anymore do not understand God the way they need to understand God, because they don't have a father in the home that disciplines. Because the world would tell you to discipline is an evil thing. God very clearly states, spare the rod, spoil the child. Now that's not a nice thing. If you spare the rod, to spoil means to make them rotten, to make them of no value. And when you do not discipline your children, and friends, you're not going to break them. Sure, they're going to be unhappy for a while. As it says, no discipline seems pleasant at the time. Who enjoys discipline? Okay? I mean, I remember growing up, my dad disciplining me. And I don't ever remember saying, you know, Dad, I volunteered this week. Could you discipline me? Let me find something that you can straighten out in me. I mean, you know, that didn't happen. Okay? Yes, I tried to do the right thing, but I wasn't volunteering to be disciplined. God has disciplined me many times. And you'll go through hardships, and sometimes we should endure those hardships, but God is disciplining us, treating us as children to train. You train up a child in the way they should go. Friends, it's a lot like the service. You go into the service. I remember my son going into the Navy, and he had me laughing. I had tears in my eyes listening to him talk about his boot camp. He says, the first thing we did, he says, man, we went to this hotel the first night. I dropped him off over in Tampa at this hotel. And he says, man, they treated us like kings. They wined us and dined us and treated us great. Gave this lovely ride up to Chicago. And he says, we got off this bus. He says, Dad, they started screaming at us. Everybody's running this way and that, and they're screaming, stand against the bulkhead. So, well, we didn't know what a bulkhead was. We weren't sailors, and they made that very clear to us. So they weren't sailors. They had to earn the right to be called a sailor. And he says, we felt like, what did we do wrong? We're being screamed at. Well, friends, it wasn't that they were being disciplined as in punished. They were being disciplined as in being trained. You not only discipline your child if they do something wrong so they don't do it again, but you train your children, and it takes effort. And if you love that child, you're going to invest your time in that child. Okay? Where your treasure is, your heart is. Let's face it. The most valuable thing we have in life is our time. When you give somebody your time, you're giving them the most valuable thing you have. It ain't money, it ain't gold, it ain't silver. Friends, it's your time. And your children want your time. I like what Dr. Dobson did a study years ago. I don't know if you know who he is. But they asked all these children, if you could have one thing from your parents, anything you want, what would you ask your parents for? Well, they were expecting, you know, like Nintendo or a TV or bikes or this sort of thing. And the children came back, I think it was like 80% of them said their time. I want their time more than anything else. Why? Because your children love you. And you need to love your children. And friends, when you give them your time and you discipline them, you're loving on them because you're training them, because you want them to have a good life and peace. You're going to take them, when you train them, you're taking them into a land flowing with milk and honey, so to speak. They'll have righteousness, peace, and joy. Where there's righteousness, you're going to find peace and joy. It follows suit. So, what does it say? You're being trained, you're being disciplined. It says, strengthen your feeble arms and weak knees. Make level paths for your feet, so that the lame may not be disabled, but rather healed. In other words, if you ever have something wrong, let's say your hip is out or your knees are out, you want to walk on level paths. You don't, until that thing heals up, okay? If your soul is out of whack, you want to walk on level paths until it heals up. That's what that means. I mean, that literally is what it means. Now, follow me if you would be so kind. And we already did that. We're going to go to Hebrews chapter 12 and verse 18. You have not come to a mountain that can be touched, that is burning with fire, to darkness, gloom, and storm, to a trumpet blast, or to such a voice speaking words that those who heard it begged that no further word be spoken to them, because they could not bear what was commanded. If even an animal touched the mountain, it must be stoned. The sight was so terrifying that Moses said, I am trembling with fear. So they came to the Mount Sinai, and here God, fire's coming down from heaven, you know, and literally, if you've ever seen a picture of Mount Sinai, the stones on top are black, and the stones were melted, okay? I mean, it had to be such a horrific sight to see, you know, for them to see. You know, I mean, here they're not sophisticated Egyptians. These people were slaves. They didn't have the internet. They didn't understand these things. And God is speaking to them. Can you imagine? Just try to bear with me, because sometimes I try to do this. Why God? Why am I saved? Why did God reveal himself to me? So can you imagine, you have been a slave. You have been told you are nothing. Your life is worthless. It was nothing for the Egyptians to beat and to just kill them. They were slaves. They were property. They were chattel. And all of a sudden, this God is speaking to you from heaven, telling you, you're my children, you're important to me, and that's why I delivered you out of the hands of the Egyptians. I mean, try to fathom this. Just try to wrap your head around it. It's kind of like a child that its whole life had never had parents. They felt like nobody loved them, nobody cared about them, turned their back on them, and all of a sudden, somebody adopts them, and they're somebody's kid, and they're treated as somebody special. It's sort of like that. Now let's read on. But you have come to Mount Zion, to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem. You to come to thousands upon thousands of angels in joyful assembly, to the church of the firstborn whose names are written in heaven. You have come to the God, the judge of all, to the Spirit of the righteous made perfect, to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and to the sprinkled blood that speaks a better word than the blood of Abel. See to it that you do not refuse him who speaks. If they did not escape when they refused him who warned them on earth, how much less if we turn from him who warns us from heaven? At that time his voice shook the earth, but now he has promised, once more I will shake not only the earth but also the heavens. The words once more indicate the removing of what can be shaken. You need to put that on a shelf. That is, created things, so that what cannot be shaken may remain. Therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken, don't forget that either. Let us be thankful and so worship God acceptably with reverence and awe, for our God is a consuming fire. So that consuming fire had been coming down on Mount Sinai. They visibly, physically saw it. And you're like, why is God talking to us? We're just a bunch of no-good slaves. We've been told we're nothing all of our lives, And all of a sudden God chooses us. So you see, God chooses the things that are not, the things that are not, the foolish things of the world to confound the wise. And boy, did he confound the Egyptians, because the Egyptians could not understand, why did anybody care about these Jews? They couldn't fathom that, because they were haughty and high and mighty and self-centered, and the Jews had been humble. God comes to the humble. Now, God spoke to them from Mount Sinai, from earth. But when you got saved, God spoke to you from heaven by His Holy Spirit. He revealed Himself to you. We have come into a time where God has revealed Himself to us in an age of grace. Even though we may not be Jews for the most part, not that He doesn't talk to Jews too, but all of us, because He was Jewish, but because we are Gentiles, He speaks to us, and He grafts us in, and He adopts us as sons, just like He adopted the Jews as His own children. And God speaks to us from heaven because God is a consuming fire. What does a fire do? Let me give you a picture of what He's talking about here. When the barley or the grain harvest was brought in, it was put over a grate and it was beaten, and the chaff was carried away by the wind. It was shaken to get the grain to fall to the ground. The chaff was carried away, and that was consumed by fire. And if you've ever seen that consumed by fire, it's almost like gasoline. It's just like a whoosh, type fire, because it's so flammable. So God shakes us, and He takes the righteous things and the good things that He puts in us, and He takes away the sin, the chaff, and it's consumed by fire. God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. He still disciplines us. Some people seem to think you get saved today and you can eat, drink, and be merry and do whatever you doggone feel like, and it don't matter. I can sin, sleep with people, go out and get drunk, carouse, and lie and cheat and do drugs and everything else, and that's okay. Listen, not my son or daughter on my watch. If I know about it, I'm going to do something about it. The difference is God always knows. One of my children one time said to me, they just got caught. They'd been doing something they shouldn't have done, and we caught them. And my daughter, I never forget, I gave part of it away, but my daughter says to me, how do you do it? How do you do it? How do you always catch me? How do you always know? I remember looking at her and say, hon, I know that it's inconceivable almost, but did you ever stop to think that I was your age at one time? She puts her head down. She listens. She goes, oh, the light bulb went off. Duh. Jesus was made like us in every way, tempted like us in every way. You think He don't know? God knows all things. And He understands how we operate. He not only sympathizes with His friends, He empathizes with us. He literally put Himself in our shoes. He gets it. He understands temptation. He didn't succumb to it like we did, but He understands it. He knows what it feels like. He knows the gravity of the pull of temptation in our life. And He became perfect through what? Come here. How did Jesus become perfect? Anybody know? Through what He suffered. It's right there in Hebrews. You mean Jesus had to be made perfect? Honey, you're not perfect when you're born. Those little babies look really perfect. You're innocent, but you're not perfect. What makes you perfect? When you can turn your back on sin and you master it. And Jesus mastered sin, and that's why He was a perfect sacrifice for you and I, because He was without sin. And He has sent His Holy Spirit, His very voice. Faith cometh by hearing, and hearing by the Word. What are we supposed to do? Through the washing of the Word, we're purified. That voice from heaven comes still by His Holy Spirit, like it did in the burning bush. Why do you think the bush was on fire? God was making a point. I'm going to burn up everything in your life, until there's nothing left to burn. I'm going to shake everything out till there's nothing left to shake. I want you to think about that as we continue in this. We're not done yet. Let's go to Deuteronomy chapter 4 and verse 15. You saw no form of any kind the day the Lord spoke to you at Horeb out of the fire. Therefore, no form. All they saw was fire. That's important. Therefore, watch yourselves very carefully so that you do not become corrupt and make for yourselves an idol, an image of any shape, whether formed like a man or a woman, like an animal or on earth or any bird that flies in the air. Can I paraphrase this just a little bit? Could you bear with me as I just do that? Or like a car, a house, shoes, purses. I guess I shouldn't have said that. Or anything else on this earth. You don't put anything before God. I see people all the time. They listen, idols have taken a different shape. And some people they'll sell their soul for that fast, cool-looking car because they think it'll make them something. You'll lose your life to find it. Let's move on. Or like any creature that moves along the ground, or any fish in the waters below. And when you look up to the sky and see the sun, the moon, and the stars, and all the heavenly array, do not be enticed into bowing down to them and worshiping things the Lord your God has apportioned to all nations under heaven. God made all those things for all of us to enjoy, not to worship. But as for you, the Lord took you and brought you out of the iron smelting furnace, out of Egypt, to be the people of his inheritance, as you now are. You see, God told Abraham, he says, I'm going to put your people, they're going to be slaves for 400 years. And for 400 years, they were slaves in Egypt. It was an iron smelting furnace. God put them into the forge to make them into the person, the people that he wanted them to be. Now, it was just the beginning. I like to talk about this, and we were on vacation one time, and we went into this pottery shop, and this lady was taking this clay and just slamming it down on the counter, and she was punching it and beating it and rolling it. And I thought she was angry or something. I says, what did that clay ever do to you? She busted out laughing. She says, oh, I'm humbling the clay. I can see that. You know, it looks pretty humble to me. She says, I'm getting all the hard spots out of it, all the impurities. I'm making it consistent throughout so that the pot can withstand the fire and not crack. Wow. That's all I could say was, wow. I was stunned. You think God don't put us through it? I mean, he gets all the hard spots, the impurities, the inconsistencies out of our life, the sin out of our life, so that we can withstand the fire. Friends, you are chosen. They were chosen to go into the iron furnace. We are chosen to go through the furnace. It's a privilege and it's an honor, because God is making us into the vessel he wants us to be. The Lord was angry with me because of you. Moses is speaking, by the way. He solemnly swore that I would not cross the Jordan and enter the good land the Lord your God is giving you as your inheritance. Not even Moses made it into the promised land. Friends, it was by grace, by grace, by grace. Moses didn't. You couldn't get in because of what you did. You couldn't get in because you earned it. You had to be chosen. And I will die in this land. I will not cross the Jordan, but you are about to cross over and take possession of the good land. Be careful not to forget the covenant of the Lord your God that he made with you. And do not make yourselves an idol in the form of anything the Lord your God has forbidden. For the Lord your God is a consuming fire and a jealous God. Friends, we must not forget, now more than ever in these last days, God is a consuming fire. He is turning you into the vessel and the thing that he wants you to be. If you cannot withstand the fire of God, you're not going to make it in this world as his instrument. God puts you through that fire so that he can make you consistent, get the sin out, and temper you and make you into a tool fit for service, whether it's a piece of pottery, whether it's steel or whatever. He calls some vessels unto honor, unto dishonor. But friends, God is forming you and making you. He is the potter. Who are you to look to him and tell him what to make of you or how to make it of you? Have you ever had a child look at you? I literally had a child trying to tell me how I was to discipline and how I was to raise children, and I looked at him. I says, I'm literally 6 times older than you, and you're going to tell me how to raise children? How many children have you had? Well, obviously none. What do you know about it? You know, I got a secret for you. You may not like what I'm about to say, but with age comes a little bit of wisdom. You know, when you live life after a while, it's like I told the same daughter I told you about earlier. She was arguing with me about doing something one time. And she said to me, finally I says, fine, go ahead and do it. She says, what? And I said, what do you mean what? I told you to do it. You asked to do it. I gave you permission. Go for it. And she says, all right, what? And I says, well, honey, I says, you've lived so many years. You're so wise. I've only lived 20 years longer than you. And I said, you know, I've raised children. I've had a family, been married all these years. And I said, when I was your age, I was brilliant. I was a teenager. Friends, I knew everything. You could ask me. I could tell you. You name it, I knew it. Boy, by golly. And then I got in my 20s and been married a little bit, and I realized I wasn't quite as smart as I thought I was. Got in my 30s, and it dawned on me I'm kind of stupid. Got in my 40s and realized not only am I kind of stupid, I'm probably totally stupid. I don't know half of what I thought I knew. You get in your 50s, and friends, by the time you get my age, you almost get unsure of yourself. You older people, you understand what I'm talking about. I just did a devotional and made a statement in it. If I would have known then what I know now, I probably would have never tried to get on the air or start this ministry. It was totally by faith, and it was by faith because I was ignorant. I had no idea the cost and what could go wrong and everything that had to be done. I probably wouldn't even attempted it, but God says, hey, stupid, come over here and do this thing. So listen to what the Spirit is saying tonight.
This program is made possible by the prayers and financial support of viewers just like you. To help us continue with this ministry, please write to Carpenters Way Ministries, P.O. Box 23, Palm Harbor, Florida, 34682. You can also give securely online by visiting www.pastorjefflane.com or call the ministry at 727-222-6162.